In this video, I'm going to show you how I built this assembly table that you can fold up and put it up against the wall and use it as a normal workbench. It has a built-in router lift, it has plenty of storage, and I'm going to show you how I built these drawers without using any drawer slides. As always, I'm going to show you everything you need to know to build this in this video. But if you want to make the build a little bit quicker, you can get Woodworking Plans, both in metric and imperial, on my Etsy store. So I started by cutting the legs out of some 2x4. I cut 8 legs at 59 centimeters and then 8 at 60.2. And I set up a stop block to make the cuts easy to repeat. So I got 8 2x4s at 59 centimeters and then 8 at 60.2. And now I'm going to take one of each and I'm just going to put them on top of each other. And then I've got this scrap 2x4 that I'm going to put underneath on one end and slide this up until it is flush with the 2x4, like that. And then on the other side there should be like around 11.2 centimeters. So now I'm just going to put some glue on here, not on the scrap 2x4, but on the two longer ones. I'm putting this on top. Getting it flush at the top here, and also just going to make sure that it is nice and flush on the edges as well, like that. Then I'm going to put a couple of screws in here. So now I'm going to do that for all of the legs, 8 legs in total, and then I'm just going to let them dry for a little bit. Then I started to build the bottom shelf and I cut 4 2x4s at 105 centimeters and then 4 at 47 centimeters. I attached these by just pre-drilling some holes and using some screws. I then cut a couple of pieces of this very cheap 12mm plywood at roughly 115 by 47 centimeters that I fastened on top of the frame. Again, just using some screws. For the top frame, I had 45-degree miter on the ends. These are 115 centimeters and 57 centimeters. Now at this point, the legs had dried, so I gave them a quick round through the thickness planer before sanding them. The legs will need to have a tenon at the top, and I decided to do this on the bandsaw. I just made a cut down the middle of the end that sticks out 10 centimeters, and on 4 of them you want to cut the shoulder on the right side, and then on the other 4 legs you want to cut the shoulder on the left side. This is because all of the tenons need to face in towards the center of the workbench. So 4 of each of these ones. Again, I'm installing them with the tenon always in towards the center and attaching them using some screws on the underside of the shelf frame. I screwed one screw first, then made sure the leg was square before screwing the second screw. I could then install the top frame using the mitered pieces that I cut earlier. Once I had 2 of these, I could install the casters. These are some lockable casters that I got from Amazon, and I really like the color of these. I'll make sure to put a link for these as well as the other hardware and tools I used for this build in the description. Everything is also linked in the Woodworking Plans as well. Of course, you could just leave the benches like this without finishing, or you could finish with pretty much any type of finish that you like. I went for the Rubio Monocoat hybrid wood protector on the legs and frames. It gives a great layer of protection, and more importantly, it looks really cool. So this is pretty easy to apply. Just put on a decent layer using either a brush or a cloth, and after a few minutes wipe off the excess finish using a clean cotton cloth. I then added a double layer of 12mm plywood as the bench top, and I cut it flush using the track saw. I gave the bench top a quick sanding with 120 grit sandpaper before applying some Osmo top oil. So I installed these hinges at the back, and then at the front I needed something that could lock the benches in place. I figured that these toggle clamp latches would be the best option, as these will also pull the benches together. So I added one latch that would lock them in place in the long position, and then one that would lock them in place in the folded position. Now I could do the first proper test of the transforming workbench. Okay, so I also want to add this router lift to this workbench or assembly table, and I thought about maybe adding like a table at the end here that you can flip up, flip down again. But I'm thinking, first of all, it's going to be a bit difficult to make it really solid and sturdy. And second, it's just not necessary. So what I'm going to do instead is to have the router lift here on the table. Of course, it's going to sit flush with the tabletop, so it's not going to be in the way whenever I'm doing some assembling or glue ups or something like that. So I'm going to have it here, and we got this Enjoywood router lift for handheld routers for the DeWalt and Makita. They fit the DeWalt and Makita routers, and probably some more as well. I got this from Banggood, and I'll put a link for this down in the description. For the fence, of course, you can make it as fancy as you want to. You can have T-tracks and buy fences, and that's great, but for me, I like to just keep it simple and keep it cheap. So I'm just going to use this fence that I made out of plywood earlier, and you can just clamp it down on the tabletop. You don't really need anything more than that, or I don't at least. Now the router lift comes with a flush trim bit that you can use along with this template to get the right size and shape of the router lift. Unfortunately, the flush trim bit does not fit my router, and I don't have a similar one with a wheel on the top. But I think I'm going to be good just using a drill bit and jigsaw and fence.
I tried to cut using a fence and a jigsaw, but this did not go well. Once the blade went off the line a little bit, I didn't have the room to tilt the saw back at the line, so it was actually a lot better to just use the jigsaw without the fence. I then installed these corner brackets that come along with the router lift. They have these screws so that you can adjust the height of the router lift. This means you don't have to worry that much about the thickness of your workbench because you do have some leeway. And once the router has been installed, you can use this tool to adjust the height of the router bit. And you also have this micro adjustment knob. So each turn with this red dial represents 1.5 millimeter. So you can get really accurate with the height adjustment. And now we're moving on to the drawers. So I started by making two small cabinets with 12mm plywood. I'm going to use a drawer system that I've used before on my miter station. I've also seen Drew from Whitworks and Dennis from Hooked and Wood use something similar. It uses some plywood or MDF strips as drawer slides, so it's really cheap as well. The cabinets are pretty simple. Make sure you measure the distance between the top and bottom frame to get the right height of the cabinet. If you're using some thicker plywood for the bottom shelf, you might have to make some adjustments here. These strips, aka drawer slides, are cut from 9mm plywood. They are 7 centimeters wide and 51 centimeters long. But first we'll need a thin strip at 2 centimeters wide that we install at the bottom. After that, I use a piece of 12mm plywood as a spacer and install the rest of the strips all the way to the top. I do this on both sides of both of the cabinets. The drawer bottoms are also made from 9mm plywood, and they'll need to be around 5mm narrower than the inside of the cabinet. These are going to slide on top of the drawer slide strips. I made two different sizes for the drawer frames, 4 that were 12 centimeters tall and 2 that were 6 centimeters tall. All the weight of these drawers will be on the drawer bottoms, so it's not necessary to use any screws here. I just use some brad nails, both for the frames themselves, but also to attach the drawer bottom to the frame. I used a piece of plywood to get an even overhang on both sides. This should be roughly 6 to 7 millimeters. So here you can see that the drawers are sliding really nicely on these plywood strips. For the drawer fronts, I'm just gonna have a cutout handle. So I drill a couple of holes and cut out the rest using my jigsaw. When installing the drawer fronts, I like to use some regular playing cards to get the right spacing. And on my miter station, I only used brad nails to fasten the drawer fronts, and they have been holding up well so far, so I'm just going to do the same here as well. I might have to get back later and add some screws if I feel that the drawer fronts are starting to get loose. For the top drawer, I couldn't access the inside of the drawer to fasten the front, so I took a Spanish one, as we say in Norway, which means I cheated a little bit and put a nail in the front. That held the front in place, and then I could add more nails from the inside of the drawer. Installing the first cabinet went pretty good, it slid in nicely, and I just had to tap it in place with a mallet before adding a couple of screws. The second cabinet started out really good, but then it wouldn't go underneath the 2x4 at the back. So I had to bring out my multi-tool and cut off the inside edge of the 2x4. That way the cabinet could go underneath and I could tap it in place and fasten with some screws.
So this is a really great addition to my shop, at least. I like that you can have it in this long position if you're doing like finishing or gluing up some longer pieces. And then of course, if you're doing some wider stuff, then you can fold it up. And after you've done, you sort of tuck it up against the wall again. So it doesn't have to take up a lot of space like in the middle of the shop. Also, there's plenty of storage, which I don't really need right now, but it's always nice to have some free drawers. I use the same system as I did on my miter saw station, so if you haven't checked out that video yet, you can do that afterwards. Again, if you want to have the woodworking plans, I have them available in both metric and in imperial. They are on my Etsy store. So thank you for watching. If you haven't seen my miter saw station video, you can check it out right here.